Good afternoon, everybody. I think that we may wait a couple minutes for everyone to get joined in here and the audio all connected before I start with content. But before we get started, I'll just take care of a few housekeeping matters. So today I'll be chatting about teaching junior engineers how to author requirements. And if my slide will go ahead, here we go. So we'll talk about why knowledge transfer is important to these junior engineers, processes and tools to help with knowledge transfer, as well as how to enforce authoring best practices, standards, and rules. So I'm your host, Rebecca, and Olivia Kenny is here with me today as well. She's mastering the chat part. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out to Olivia, and we'll grab time during the presentation to address those questions. There'll also be a question and answer session at the end. So if you have additional questions, feel free to wait till the end. So, after the webinar, you'll receive a link to the recording of this webinar as well as a survey. So the survey is just a quick 2-question survey, and in that they'll just be, would you refer it to us, as well as any feedback. And after you answer this survey, you'll receive links. So you'll receive a link to the slides from today, as well as previous tutorials that were very popular among our contacts. So our previous live tutorial on ears, the easy approach to requirement syntax, as well as our automating the Encozy guide live tutorial, which was hosted by my colleague James Carr. You'll also receive a link to the PDF guide of this of the Teaching Junior Engineers How to Author Better Requirements guide that we created. So we'll get right into it. So why is knowledge transfer important? So knowledge transfer is important to retain the knowledge within your teams. Generally, a lot of teams have a lot of knowledge hosted in senior engineers' heads. So it's important to transfer that down to the mid-level engineers as well as the junior level engineers, so that the knowledge can be retained within your organization as these people move on through retirement or to other organizations or teams. We live in a workforce that is a lot more mobile, so whether that's engineers moving forward to other teams, senior management, as well as on different projects, but it could even be in between industries or companies. So we need to retain that company knowledge. And with that, retaining your company knowledge increases your competitive advantage. So many companies' competitive advantage are not the products that they have, the systems that they produce, or how they help their customers. It's the knowledge within the people that created those systems and products. So if you lose that knowledge, if you lose that engineer, then part of your competitive advantage goes with it. So it's important to transfer the knowledge from that engineer proactively before they move on to a different team or retire, etc. Another issue is expedited onboarding. So if you don't have a good knowledge transfer process, then your onboarding of junior engineers or even new engineers will be very lengthy. So in order to shorten that process, you need to transfer the knowledge. And that way, and have a good process to transfer the knowledge so that it's easily accessible to these new individuals and organizations. And the fourth and final item of why knowledge transfer is important is to reduce knowledge bottlenecks. So many of you may have a bottleneck at the review process of your requirements process. This is because a lot of the mid to senior level engineers are the only ones that are capable of reviewing these documents. And if they're the only ones that have the knowledge of what makes a good requirement, what the rules are, and how to address them, then that becomes a very lengthy bottleneck. If more of that knowledge is transferred to your junior engineers, then they're able to address quality concerns while they're writing the requirements or even reviewing their own before they get to the reviewing stage, so that those reviewers have less syntactical or ambiguous requirements to look through. So here are some things to consider when creating or revising your current knowledge transfer plan or your current training strategy. So one, what knowledge is being transferred and why? So it's important to determine what you're trying to transfer to the junior engineers. Is it syntactical knowledge? Is it requirements writing best practices? Or is it actual internal rules and philosophies on writing requirements? And why is this knowledge being transferred? With the younger generations, they're very driven on, okay, I'm learning this, but why is it important? How does it affect my work down the line? And how does this affect the product down the road? So if you explain to them why it's important that they're following these rules and standards, then they are more likely to intake them and follow them. Number two is who is involved in the transfer process. So how many senior engineers do you need involved in this process in order to transfer that knowledge easily and efficiently? If you're doing a mentoring program, you may need many senior engineers involved in order to mentor these junior engineers efficiently and effectively. But if you're doing more of a formalized training plan and written documentation, you may need less senior engineers' knowledge, as you need less people to match up with those junior engineers. So it's important to decide how much work power or how much manpower do you want to put into your engineering knowledge transfer process in order to decide on a proper plan and a knowledge transferring process. Number three is, how will the knowledge be transferred in an efficient manner, and what tools will you be using? So knowledge transfer processes can be very efficient or inefficient. Some of the most inefficient ways to knowledge transfer are actually the most effective. So you have to find that balance in what's right for your organization. There are tools out there that will help with that inefficiency and help gain effectiveness in your knowledge transfer process. But again, you have to decide what's right for your team and your organization. So outsourcing may be top of mind when it comes to discuss a knowledge transfer process or a training process for these junior engineers, but you have to be careful and outsource appropriately. Determine which parts of your process may be outsourced with little knowledge loss. Again, the knowledge in your engineers' heads is your biggest competitive advantage. So you want to keep as much of that internally as possible, and you want to keep your knowledge internalized. So you don't want your external parties to know more about your business than yours. So what risk do you want to take? How much do you want to outsource, and how much do you need to keep internally? That's all up to you. Know your business and maintain your competitive advantage. Again, that's just saying you have to outsource appropriately and be careful what you decide to outsource. And you must weigh the pros and cons. Do you gain more of your senior engineers' time to freely work on projects if you outsource this? And what do you lose by outsourcing this? Again, that's all up to you to decide what pros are worth it and what cons are a little too risky for your environment. So our first suggestion and process that you can put into your knowledge transfer and training processes is a written process and documentation. So keep a record. This basically comes first to mind to anyone that thinks of a knowledge transfer or training process, because it's very common. But it's great and used with conjunction with other methods. A written process or documentation will fail on its own. It's great for documenting and standardizing core processes. So things like requirements must be written in Microsoft Word before being transferred to our requirements management tool of choice. Or requirements must be analyzed by QA Scribe before going to the reviewer. So those core processes and standardization of them is very important. But this is the only thing that can effectively live in these written processes in the documentation. And the documents here must be assigned an owner to keep them current, and that owner must be responsible for updating these as needed. As if you don't have updated written documents, then the junior engineers are going to learn a process that is old, and your processes won't be as effective or efficient. So live documentation systems are another option. Wiki systems are part of these live documentation systems, but they're good, they're bad, and sometimes they're ugly. So what is the good? The good is that it can be a great source of up-to-date data if a wiki is properly implemented. If it's not properly implemented, then and easy to use, then engineers won't use it, or it will become kind of a messy dialogue that nobody will be able to effectively search and use. And that brings it to bad. The bad is it can be unorganized and hard to search for these topics of choice. If an engineer tries to search for a topic and it's not readily available or easy to find, they're going to give up. They're not going to use your wiki system that you've created. So it must be easy to search and easy to find topics and have them readily at hand for those junior engineers to be able to intake that information and use it. The ugly is that anyone can make edits and additions. So if it's not being properly monitored by a senior member of your team, then it may be full of bad information and bad data. If it's full of bad data or incorrect data, then these junior engineers are learning from bad data. And that's just causing more problems in your system. So wikis can be great, but they have to be properly managed, properly implemented, so that there's no bad data or very little bad data, and they are easy to search so that these junior engineers can actually learn from them and use them. Another form of training is formalized training. So it can be a great first step, and it's great for learning best practices, your rules, and external rules, as well as processes that you have. Formalized training can be outsourced very easily. And with that being outsourced, you can trust those external experts to stay up to date on the newest and greatest forms of requirement writing. So even your senior or mid-level engineers might be able to add or amend the current processes and make them more efficient. It should also be used in conjunction with other training methods. So formal training is great for your core processes, again, really hammering those points home with those engineers of what's important to your organization to create a better product. But you can't get all of the information out of your senior engineer's head by a formal training session. The engineers can only intake so much on these formal training sessions. So when partnered with something like a mentoring program, it's great to get both sides. And that brings us to cross-training and mentoring. So cross-training and mentoring can be very inefficient, but it can be largely effective. So this method is by far the most inefficient method that is available, but the effectiveness for most organizations outweighs the inefficiency. It's inefficient generally because lots of manpower from the senior engineer and junior engineer have to go into this, but the junior engineer can learn from the senior engineer's mistakes or things that happened in the past, as well as learn from their expertise. So somebody to pick their brain and learn a better process. So there's a variety of cross-training and mentoring methods. There's your formal mentoring, which is that one-to-one that I've talked about. There's peer coaching. So a peer that maybe has been in the role a little bit longer than that other colleague, and they can pick their brain on things that challenge them when they first started in the organization and how they've overcome those challenges. So someone on the same level of that junior engineer that they may find more comfortable talking to. There's also a cross-training program. So learning a different role to better understand how it affects their role. It's great to become experts in more than one thing. So cross-training just makes a better overall employee because they're well-rounded. And wide meeting invitations. I think personally this one is key for requirements engineers, because if they're not involved in that review process or get to see what that review process looks like, they don't know how their work is affecting those senior or mid-level engineers or those reviewers. So if they can sit in on a meeting and not input, just sit in and listen, it's great knowledge for them to have that when I write a requirement that looks like this is all of the discussion that goes into it at this meeting, or this is how much time it takes my superior to address this poor requirement. This is why it's important for me to write good requirements, or this is why it's important for me to use these rules and follow these rules very carefully. So it just allows them to see the efforts of their work beyond just the initial step after. Another item that is great for knowledge transfer is networking. So right now, you're all probably thinking, what's networking good for? It's just a bunch of people awkwardly standing in a room. If there's food or maybe beverages involved, it's a little better, but then it's really ineffective and it's kind of a waste of my time. So networking is more than just those items. It's networking internally, whether it's at the lunch table and you get talking about requirements, or at a coffee break and you have a chance to speak with a more senior engineer that has more knowledge than yourself. Any chance that you can have to get to pick somebody else's brain. There is also this traditional networking, which can be effective if used properly, but many people don't use it properly. So it's kind of what works for your organization. So some networking methods, again, you have the traditional networking, but then you have team meetings. So even a meeting just called to bounce ideas off your team, or pick their brains about, I'm having this problem. How did you guys overcome it in the past? Great information sessions for those junior engineers to be able to learn a little bit about what their colleagues have experienced previously. Face-to-face interaction is also key. So in our digital world, more and more people are working remotely and not getting a chance to interact with their colleagues face-to-face. This face-to-face interaction can be key in learning. So the more chances you have to bring those people together, the better, and there'll be more learning involved. Also internal chats and social media. So these can be used to chat with members of their team and pick their brains over Messenger, as well as the social media you can have like a requirement tip of the day, and everyone's in charge of one requirement tip. And that way people are learning by creating this requirement tip, but those engineers are also seeing that information. Another idea would be doing a requirement blog that would go over some examples of maybe poorly written requirements that were made better by a few simple fixes that somebody could quickly read in a few minutes. So another area to gather knowledge and have it easily accessible for those junior engineers. Another item is lunch and learns. Everybody loves food, so more people are going to come to a lunch and learn than say a meeting maybe, or an optional meeting. As well, if there's a great topic that a senior engineer is passionate about, they can really get the junior engineers involved and integrated into the team. They're more willing to learn from these senior engineers in this unformalized setting, and it makes everybody relax a little bit more. So the last item that's very important to training these junior engineers and the knowledge transfer is standard and rule enforcement. So standards and rules could be your internal standard that you have determined is very important to your teams in writing requirements, or it could be as simple as we've adopted the NCOSI rules, or we've adopted the EARS formatting, EARS being the easy approach to requirement syntax. So as long as everybody is aware of these rules and what rules they need to follow, that's the first step. The second step is enforcing them. And using checklists and tools to enforce these standards and rules is very important. So checklists are good for basic rules and best practices. So using certain words, or we use ears, we follow in cozy, things like that. If it's a list of 10 to 15, generally you can keep those top of mind and write to those 10 or 15 rules. But checklists often become too cumbersome. Think of InCozy. InCozy has 41 rules. Are you going to check off every single InCozy rule every time you write a requirement? Probably not. They're probably going to be somewhere in your head, and you're hoping that when you write a requirement that it complies to all of these, but you're not going to go and check every single InCozy rule off. So this is why checklists become too cumbersome, because it often ends up that a standard starts small and grows with time. So this is where tools come in. So requirements analysis tools like QA Scribe can help automate rules and standards developed. This is because they use natural language processing, which can pick out errors that aren't complying with your standard or rule and bring it to that junior engineer's attention. And this way he knows that one of the rules that you have internally is not being met. Automating these rules and standards helps enforce them and keep new authors on the right track. Like I said, they can edit their own work. They'll be able to see when they did not follow a rule and easily be able to address that. And if they can't address it, ask a question. So how can QA Scribe help teach junior engineers? I briefly alluded to that in the previous slide, but let's move forward. So QA Scribe is there to help with knowledge transfer, and it's not replacing anyone, it's just helping those junior engineers along the way. So the professional needs to be there to understand the project, author the framework, and solve the problems. So that's a senior engineer needs, and junior engineers both need to understand that project, but the senior engineer can influence the junior engineer by the way of a configuration. So they're the ones that are setting those rules that the junior engineer needs to follow. The junior engineer is still authoring the framework and solving the problems that QA Scribe is finding, but QA Scribe is there to apply the principles and identify the problems. So the principles and the problems, meaning things that don't comply to your internal rules and standards. It also clarifies the content by applying cozy rules to your content. So it alerts you when there's ambiguous language being used and a risk of misinterpretation, allowing that engineer to then address those items and clarify the content. So what are QA Scribe's benefits to the learning process? The first one is it helps facilitate mentoring. QA Scribe allows team members to generate a report of their requirements and the analysis that QA Scribe provides. That way you can send that report to your mentor or discuss it in a meeting and address the issues at hand. You can address the issues that maybe the junior engineer didn't know how to respond to or didn't know how to fix, and as well, the senior engineer can ensure that the junior engineer's work is improving along the way. The authors also can learn from their own mistakes. So QA Scribe can tell them, this word is ambiguous because. It categorizes them into 13 categories, allowing the junior engineer to see why it's a problem and how to fix it. This way, by the time it gets to the reviewers, all the ambiguous language should be removed. And by doing that, it saves reviewers time by fixing simple errors. We hear time and time again from our customers that there's many words that their engineers use that they end up fixing or sending the same note back to them over and over again, saying this word is unacceptable, use a different word. QA Scribe would alert that engineer to the use of that word, and it would be fixed before it got to the reviewer. You can also report on new engineers' progress. So with our reporting system, it does have a date and a timestamp. So that junior engineer can make a report from the first revision or from the first draft, and once it gets to the final draft, you can see how far that document has came. You can also see from one project to another. So from when the junior engineer starts writing the requirements to 3 months later, you can see how they've progressed. Is there areas that they're not addressing or maybe that haven't improved? If they're not improving, are others not improving either? And if they're not, you can facilitate some training in regards to that issue. So to that, it helps facilitate training topics. If there's a certain area that most junior engineers aren't understanding and continue to make the same mistakes and don't understand how to fix them, you can easily address that during a formalized training session. Next one, it enforces your rules and standards, like I mentioned before. If you follow Cozy, if you follow EARS, if you have an internal standard, we can customize it so that it enforces those important rules for you. As well, it reduces friction in the learning process. So we hear from some of our customers that having a third-party tool telling that engineer that they did it wrong for the 10,000th time is much better than that reviewer coming back and having to tell them, you made this mistake again, fix it. So if you have a third-party tool that's telling them before the reviewer has to, great. There's less friction in your team, and the engineer is again learning from their own work using the tool. So with that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about one of our customers that actually uses QA Scribe in their knowledge transfer process. So the Royal Canadian Air Force implemented QA Scribe into their process a few years ago. And with that, they saw the reduction of the requirements review time by over 50%. They saw this because they implemented QA Scribe at the very lowest stage of their requirement writing. And it starts at the writer and goes all the way through the reviewer. So the reviewer made the configuration that fits their team, fits their project, and pushes it down to those writers. Those writers then are using QA Scribe to write their requirements. And that reviewer stated that he does not want to see the requirements until the whole document is rated at least a 4 to 5. If they do not have a 4 to 5, it will not get passed to him, saving him time because the document is already clear and unambiguous by the time he gets it. As well, when that document is being passed to him, if there are any single requirements that are 1 out of 5, they must have an explanation as to why they were left at 1 out of 5 and why the engineer thinks it's appropriate to have that. If there's an explanation, then he can simply read that explanation, agree with it or disagree, send it back, or keep it as it is. So it's just saving that reviewer time by allowing those engineers to learn as they're writing. With that, I will go over to our QA Scribe page now and give you a brief demo of some of the items that I talked about and how you can address those in your junior engineer training. So I'm just going to get rid of that here. So this is QA Scribe within Word. It's also available in Excel. We have the Lunar Exploration Light Rover document here, which some of you may have seen before. And we have 115 requirements. So I'm just going to go through and analyze those. You'll notice here that it analyzes the requirements very quickly. And we're getting 3 analysis types. So quality, consistency, and similarity. Quality is where I was talking about the junior engineers being able to clear up their ambiguous statements. So when we view the analysis, we're brought to the quality screen. So here you see that overall quality score. So this is that 4 to 5 score that the reviewer didn't want to see until it was the document until it was achieved. These are all the individual quality scores. So you can see each and every one is analyzed and is shown in its form. If we go and click on one of these requirements, QA Scribe will bring you to that requirement as well as highlight it in color code and allow you to see where the issues lie. So here you can see all the issues. If you hover over these issues, this is where I was talking about that it tells the engineer why it's a problem and possibly how to fix it. So for multiple imperatives, ensure a single imperative is present in the requirement, split a requirement with more than one imperative into separate requirements. So again, giving them a heads up of why it's a problem. As most of you know, multiple imperatives are a problem within requirements because if there's more than one imperative, there could be more than one test on whether you actually fulfilled that requirement or not. So it's very important to only have that one. There's also, you can see here, cross-referencing pronouns and measurable quantifications. So all of these here will affect this quality score and alert the engineer, the junior engineer, to, hey, this is a risky requirement. It has lots of ambiguous items going on. I have to fix it. This is a problem. If you click on any of these, it just highlights what words are affecting that issue, allowing them to really focus in on that issue and see where they went wrong. You'll notice that there's another section down here of quality warnings. So in this case, it is universal quantifiers and passive voice. So universal quantifiers can be a problem because they're words such as any or all. So do you really mean any direction? Do you really mean all frequencies? It just alerts that engineer that they could be more specific, and if they can be, they should. This section here does not affect your quality score. It just highlights this little arrow, this little triangle here as a warning, and it will be located here in the QA Scribe screen. You will notice that some 5 out of 5s will have a 5 out of 5 quality score, but it'll still have a warning. That's because of the use of universal quantifiers, passive voice, or incomplete sentences. To give you an idea of how in-depth we go into these categories listed here, these are all of the issues that you can see. So there's 13 categories here, and all of these could be highlighted in a requirement if they were present. You can also sort your requirements in this screen by score. So you can have all of the 1 out of 5s first, which are the ones that contain the most risk, the most ambiguous phrases, the most errors against those rules and standards that you worked hard to make. So this allows them to address the most risky ones first and then move down to the less risky as they review them. The next screen here is consistency. So consistency is units and terms. This is just a quick check so that you can ensure that you've used the proper units in your work. So if you click on any of these here, you'll notice that all the requirements that contain that unit are listed. Click any of those and it brings you to the requirement. You can filter them as well by the international system of units or inconsistent with. In this case, the whole document is in metric except for this one indication of inch. Again, click on it, brings you to it, and you can see exactly where it's located, allowing that junior engineer to fix their mistake and determine whether should that be inch or is that centimeters. Does that need to be converted from 15 inches to centimeters, or is that just 15 centimeters? They can catch it themselves and answer that question. For terms, this is ensuring that your team is using consistent language. So in this case, the proper noun is Lunar Exploration Light Rover. This list contains any nouns or pronouns that are found within the document. So if we just search for rover to see if anybody got a little bit lazy and shortened it down, you'll see here that there are indications of rover and analog rover. Click on that, click on the requirement, brings you to it and highlights it. So you can ask that question. What did I mean by the analog rover? Did I mean the Lunar Exploration Light Rover, or did I mean another vehicle? Let's fix that up and make that more clear so that my reviewer doesn't have to come back and ask me that question. Again, saving both the author, the reviewer time. The last piece of QA Scribe is similarity. So in this case, the junior engineers would be able to check to see if anything was contradictory or redundant that they wrote. You can toggle the similarity strengthhold from 50% to 100%. Most organizations keep it around that 80%. When you click on that first requirement, all the matching lists below with the percentage When you click on that second one, brings it side by side, allowing you to see exactly what is different. So in this case, the only difference is that the first requirement states rover to xdoc. The second requirement states xdoc to rover, as well as the first requirement states downlink, and the second requirement says uplink. So if these were contradictory, you'd be able to fix those right here. It will catch units, so if one says the rover must stop within 5 meters and the other says the rover must stop within 7 meters, it would catch that, allowing you to view them side by side and fix that error. So you can see all of the analysis in this screen generated in a report. So this report can include or not include any of the analysis that you previously saw. It can only include certain quality scores if you wish. So if a junior engineer has questions about his 1 out of 5s and how to fix them, he could just send the reviewer his 1 out of 5s and say, hey, I know there's problems here, but I don't know how to fix them. Can you help me? Or send them to a peer for his peer mentorship, or his mentor for a senior engineer to get some assistance with these. You can also sort them by how they appear in the document or by quality score. So when I create this report, you'll notice that it comes with a PDF document. It's dated, time-stamped, and it allows you to view the analysis in a PDF screen. So here's the report. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can view that better. Again, you see the document name. There's that date and timestamp I was talking about. It also ensures that that user used the proper configuration. So you can have multiple configurations available for a user, whether it's per projects or on multiple projects, or for different use cases. Again, this is just ensuring that they've used that configuration that the senior engineers have created and pushed down to them. The score summary. So this is where you can track how they're progressing and whether they need training or we need to get some training for the group in. So the number of requirements in each quality score is available here. And then this is that analysis breakdown. So in those 13 categories, how many occurrences of each of these categories is happening? If a measurable quantification is always a problem and it's always the highest, that means that maybe you should get some training in on that immeasurable quantification. It just allows you to really tailor that formal training process that can be very expensive and time consuming. And here's the color coding and highlighting of each and every requirement. So this is what the reviewer would see if that engineer sent a report to them wanting help. Be like, check these requirements out, let me know what you think, and give me your feedback. So you'd be able to see that same color coding and highlighting with this guide. Any units, like in this requirement here, pop up and are color coded and highlighted. You get the terms as well and the number of similar. So if there was a similar one here, it would list one, and you could scroll down to that similarity page, and it would allow you to view those similar requirements. So in closing, QA Scribe for Teams is available, and to implement this, you get the ears integration. You also get deployment on your network of floating seats with custom analysis configurations available to all users. So that administrative feature that allows the configurations to be locked down, so your junior engineers have to follow the standards that you have set out. So now we'll be happy to take any questions. You can type them in the chat window, and as you're typing those out, just a couple housekeeping things to end things off. What's next? So you can contact us to request your one-to-one evaluation, and everyone gets a video link. So myself or one of my colleagues will be reaching out to everyone that signed up for this, and you'll get a recording of today's video, and as well, we can arrange that one-to-one consultation on a document of your choice. You'll also get a survey, and with that survey, again, if you fill it out for us, you will get a copy of the slides that include links to our previous tutorials, as well as the written guide. Again, I'm your host, Rebecca, and with me, Olivia Kenny is our chat host, and she will be happy to take your questions now. So it looks like we have no questions. We'll wait on the line for a couple minutes to see if anybody has any they would like to address. If not, my email and phone number is on that screen as well. So if you do have questions, feel free to reach out.
Glenn asks if we use machine learning to analyze.
So we don't use machine learning at this time to analyze. So currently what we're using is natural language processing. So there's a set of trigger words that are pulled out, as well as a little bit of natural language processing in the, the term consistency, as well as the similarity. As the product progresses, we foresee more machine learning being used to allow you to create better requirements to your internal standards.
Glenn also asks, have you had security reviews? My company does not allow our documents to be visible to external software products due to risk of leaks. Are there any workarounds?
So we have not had security reviews from an external source, but all of our software is downloaded on your machines and nothing is fed back to us. So it's as secure as where you have it downloaded. There are a couple different options for licensing and downloading that I'd be happy to chat with you about, Glenn. But we do have, like I said, customers in the DMD as well as our Canadian government, so it has to be very secure for their uses. We do have a security document that I would be happy to pass along to anybody who's concerned about security as well.
Greg asks, can QB Scribe be fully standalone with no internet-based hosting required?
So all of our QB Scribe licensing does not require internet access. The standalone option is locked to a machine, so it doesn't need connection required to anything. Some of the floating seats do require access to a server, an internal server of yours, in order to be able to grab a seat. But we do have both those options. So again, myself or my colleague would be happy to address questions and figure out with you what's the best option for deployment.
That's all the questions we have right
Okay,
now.
so it looks like there's no remaining questions. Again, myself or a colleague of mine will be reaching out to you with those links and that survey, so look forward to those. And if you have any questions in the meantime, again, my email is on the screen here, so feel free to note that down. Thanks for taking time to chat with us today. Happy to have you here, and looking forward to seeing you at our next live tutorial. Cheers, guys.